All right, to talk more about this, we have Ronak Desai, partner of Paul Hastings, joining us from Los Angeles to really get a sense of where things stand right now. Mr. Desai, thanks so much for speaking to us on India Sense. Let me start by asking you, there's the 10% tariff rate that has now come in for India. From 18%, that's a huge reprieve that's come in. Though it's a short window, how do you see it, the slashing of tariffs that has come in for India and for EU and the UK?
Yeah, look, I think the answer is that it's all relative. And what I mean by that is if we compare that 10% rate that he's imposed globally, and to be clear, he's not singling out India here, it's an improvement over the 18% rate that had previously been in place. And of course, the 18% rate was better than the 50% rate that he had imposed, over the last 90 days or so. So from that perspective, it's trending in the right direction. He has 150 days with this window. The rate can actually go up to 15% under the relevant statute here. Look, on the same time, though, I think, it's still, from many quarters, going to be seen as 10% too high. And ultimately now, I think there's going to be an opportunity for the United States and India and their respective negotiators to see what they can do here now that they have on the one hand, the architecture for the interim deal, on the other hand, this huge development coming out of the Supreme Court,
Yes.
Which has fundamentally, impacted the tariff rate schedule between the two countries.
Speaking of the deal, of the trade pact that has been agreed in principle, that final leg of negotiations are still underway. Do you think that will be impacted? Will that give an upper hand to Indian trade negotiators?
It's countries' interest to move the negotiations forward and to continue talking to one another with respect to the various details that are still outstanding for this deal to reach a final conclusion. Given that the tariff schedule obviously is a central feature of those negotiations, again, I think there's going to be, a degree of leverage that I believe the Indian side on the one hand is going to feel. On the other hand, there's certain non-legal and primarily political and diplomatic considerations that I think are going to ultimately govern, this phase of the dialogue between the two countries. I, feel confident and comfortable saying that they will reach an agreement. I think it's going to look, on the one hand, very similar to the initial deal that was announced, via the interim agreement. But the devil is always in the details. That was true even before the Supreme Court's announcement.
Yes.
I think now, given what we've just seen come out of Washington, we're going to see some of these terms and conditions, so to speak, change, even if the overall structure of the deal remains intact.
Okay. Which brings me to ask you the legality of some of these provisions that are being talked about. The 10% being one. There are several other sections also, 232 being one, 301. All those are measures that have never been used, rarely used. The legality of all these options that are on the table for Donald Trump now.
Yeah, the short answer is yes. There still remains quite a bit of unsettled answers to respect to these legal questions that I think are still open. You've touched on one of them already. He's got 150 days. Does he need congressional authorization after that? Will he obtain congressional authorization? Will he even pursue, his authority past that 150 days? In Washington, of course, 150 days is a lifetime. I think there's other more practical legal questions that still remain unresolved. What comes to mind, for example, at the top of that list is the issue of refunds, right? There's been about $175 billion in tariffs that have been paid, according to some estimates. The Supreme Court did not address the question of refunds. So now what everyone is going to be struggling with is, A, are they entitled to a refund? And if so, how do they obtain that refund? What is that framework going to look like? Who is going to be responsible for setting that up? Donald Trump said, this morning during his press conference that this is going to be a huge headache. It's going to be a huge challenge, and that this could be litigation that stretches on for literally decades. It's going to give rise, I think, to questions of standing, questions of timing. It's going to give rise to questions of who are the right adjudicating bodies or tribunals to be looking at this. And, just to end where we started this conversation, there are currently international trade agreements that the United States has executed with many countries around the world that are in varying degrees of completion, whether they have an actual formal trade agreement in writing in place or just the principles of an agreement that are being worked upon towards something more comprehensive. Irrespective of what category the United States finds itself in with one of these countries with whom it's pursuing this trade deal, this development from the court, of course, raises a constellation of questions of what's the impact going to be for that specific accord with that specific country. And needless to say, international law experts now at law firms around the world are going to have their work cut out for them attempting to answer some of these questions.
Absolutely. No easy answers, and most certainly a lot of questions about law in the air. Thanks so much, Ronak Desai, for speaking to us and trying to clear the air on some of those issues.